If you've ever wondered what it truly means to live a life transformed by faith, the book of Ephesians holds answers that can change everything you know about God, about yourself, and about the purpose of your existence. But before revealing these powerful lessons, I need to ask you a question. What if you have been wasting the best years of your life without even realizing it? What if there were such a big calling for you that the mere act of ignoring it could completely change your destiny? Ephesians warns us exactly about that. The first lesson Ephesians teaches us is about identity. Many live without knowing who they really are, but what if I told you that you were chosen before the foundation of the world? Ephesians 1:4 shows us that God chose us to be holy and blameless before Him. This means that your life is not an accident. But if you were chosen, why do you so often feel lost? The answer lies in understanding that your identity does not come from the world, but from God. And that changes everything. If you truly believed you were set apart by God, how would that change your choices? How would that change the way you see yourself? Would you continue seeking validation from others, or would you stand firm in the truth that you are already loved and chosen? Many live trying to fit into patterns, seeking acceptance at any cost. But Ephesians teaches us that we are already accepted by God. Do you have any idea what that means? It means that there is no longer any need to beg for approval. You don't need to mold yourself into what the world says is valuable. You already have priceless worth. But what happens when we forget this? We live insecure, afraid of rejection, always trying to prove something to others. But Ephesians reminds us that we don't need to prove anything to anyone, because we have already been chosen and loved even before we existed. The second lesson is about grace. Ephesians 2:8 tells us that we are saved by grace through faith, and this is not from ourselves, but is the gift of God. But most people live trying to be good enough, trying to deserve God's love. Have you ever felt like this? Like you're never worthy enough? Like you always have to do something more for God to truly be pleased with you? That is a trap. Ephesians teaches us that salvation is not something we earn through effort, but something we receive by faith. The problem is that many live as if they have to pay for something that has already been paid for. But if God's grace is sufficient, why do we still insist on trying to justify ourselves by works? Why do we think we need to deserve what He has already given us freely? What would happen if you simply accepted this truth? You would live with more lightness, more freedom, more security in God's love. You would understand that your worth is not in your accomplishments, but in the fact that God already loved you completely even before you did anything for Him. The third lesson is about unity. In chapter 4, Paul warns us about the importance of living in unity. But here's the problem. The modern world is marked by divisions, polarizations, and conflicts. What does it mean to live in unity in a time when people are more divided than ever? Ephesians teaches us that unity does not mean agreeing on everything, but walking together in love. But how do we do that when we are surrounded by selfishness and pride? And what if the lack of unity is preventing you from living your calling? We live in a world where everyone seeks their own interests, where people don't care about each other. But Ephesians teaches us that we are one body in Christ. This means that when one suffers, we all suffer. When one rejoices, we all rejoice. But do we live like that? Or do we spend more time comparing, competing, and distancing ourselves from one another? How would your life be if you started truly living in communion with your brothers and sisters in faith? The fourth lesson is about spiritual warfare. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us that we are not fighting against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. But how many people live as if this battle doesn't even exist? How many times have you faced inexplicable difficulties and thought it was just bad luck? What Ephesians teaches us is that we are in a battlefield, and that if we are inattentive, we have already lost. What are you doing to prepare for this battle? Are you armed with the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of the Spirit? Or are you going into battle empty-handed? The truth is that many ignore this reality and live unprepared. But have you ever stopped to think that maybe your problems aren't just normal life circumstances? What if there was something greater behind the difficulties you face? Ephesians teaches us that we need to put on the armor of God, but are we doing that? Are we strengthening our faith, living in prayer, seeking spiritual discernment, or are we vulnerable, leaving doors open for the enemy to attack? The fifth and final lesson is about love. Ephesians shows us that the love of Christ surpasses all human understanding. But do you really believe that? Because if you did, you wouldn't live as if you were alone. You wouldn't seek love in places where you will never find it. God's love is sufficient. But the question is, have you been living as someone who experiences this love, or as someone who always feels something is missing? If you truly understood the depth of God's love, your life would be different. You would stop seeking validation in relationships, success, or recognition. You would rest in the certainty that you are already loved. But how many times do we live as if that love is not enough? How many times do we let our insecurities distance us from the truth that God has already given us everything we need in Him? The book of Ephesians is not just a collection of verses. It is a call to transform your life. Now that you know these 5 lessons, the real question is, what will you do with them? Because knowing is not enough. Change begins when you decide to live according to what God has already spoken about you. The decision is in your hands. So what will you do? Will you keep living as you did before, or will you accept the call that God has for your life? If this message touched your heart, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow our videos to grow even more in faith. Like, comment, and share this message with someone who needs to hear this today. May God bless you, and see you in the next video.